Story number 1, mile marker, 237. I was 6 hours into my shift, hauling freight through the icy stretches of Highway 41, when I saw him, a lone figure standing by the road, barely visible through the thick curtain of falling snow. Normally, I don't pick up hitchhikers. Too many horror stories, too many risks, but something about him made me slow down. Maybe it was the way he stood, arms limp at his sides, head slightly tilted like he was listening to something in the wind. Or maybe it was the way my headlights seemed to pass right through him. I pulled over, rolling the window down just enough to yell through the cold, "You need a ride?" The man turned his head slowly, almost mechanically, and nodded. His face was gaunt, pale like he hadn't seen the sun in years. He wore an old, tattered coat, the kind truckers wore back in the 70s, and his boots were caked in snow and mud. Something about him made my stomach knot, but the wind howled through the empty highway, and I told myself I was being paranoid. I unlocked the door. He climbed in without a word, moving stiffly like his joints were frozen stiff. As soon as he settled, the cab filled with a stench of wet earth and something metallic, like rust. I forced a cough, trying not to gag, and focused back on the road. "Where you headed?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. The man didn't answer right away. He just stared straight ahead, hands resting awkwardly on his lap. Then in a voice that sounded dry, like wind scraping over gravel, he muttered, "Just up ahead." That should have been my first warning. There was nothing ahead. No towns, no truck stops, just miles of frozen road and dense forest on either side. I told myself maybe he lived in one of those remote cabins, the kind buried deep in the woods, where people went to disappear. For a few miles, we drove in silence. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the steady thud of snow hitting the windshield. Every so often I glanced at him from the corner of my eye. He never moved, never shifted, just sat there, staring ahead, like he could see something I couldn't. Then, at mile marker 237, he spoke. "Stop here." I hesitated. The place was pitch black, just a stretch of road swallowed by the storm. No signs of a house, no lights, just the black, gnarled trees looming in the dark like watchful figures. "You sure?" I asked. The man turned his head toward me for the first time since getting in. His eyes were wrong, not just hollow or sunken. Wrong. Like something inside was looking out, something that wasn't him. "Yes." A chill ran down my spine. I pressed my foot against the brake, and the truck groaned to a stop. The man reached for the door handle, but paused. For the first time, he looked directly at me, his lips pulling back in something that wasn't quite a smile. "They always stop," he whispered. Before I could ask what the hell that meant, he stepped out and vanished into the storm. Not walked away. Vanished. 1 second he was there, and the next, the snow swallowed him whole. The cab was dead silent. My breath came out in ragged clouds, the air inside suddenly colder than outside. I stared out into the night, waiting for movement, for footsteps, for anything. But the road was empty. I should have driven off right then. Should have floored it and never looked back. But something made me stay. Then the smell hit me again. That same rotting metallic stench, stronger this time. I gagged, covering my nose, but it clung to the air like decay soaked into the seats. I reached for my flashlight, gripping it like a lifeline, and against every instinct in my body, I opened the door. Snow crunched under my boots as I stepped out. The wind howled, whipping against my coat. but the cold felt secondary to the heavy, suffocating presence pressing against my chest. I turned my flashlight toward the tree's footprints, his, leading into the forest. But something wasn't right. There was a second set of prints, bigger, deeper, like something heavy had been walking beside him. I shined the light further. My breath caught in my throat. At the tree line, something stood there. Not a person, not an animal, just a dark shape, towering and motionless, its limbs too long, its head slightly tilted, as if it had been watching us the whole time. The air around me turned electric, buzzing like static. The flashlight flickered. Then I heard it, a whisper, not from the trees, from inside the truck. I spun around. The cab light flickered, casting erratic shadows. Inside. My gut clenched as I stepped closer. The smell of decay thickened. My pulse pounded in my ears. I looked inside. He was sitting in the passenger seat. Not the man I picked up. Something else. Its skin stretched too tight over its skull, its mouth hanging open in a frozen grin. Its eyes, empty sockets, bleeding black. I staggered back, slipping on the ice. My flashlight dropped, spinning wildly before the beam landed on the ground beside my truck. That's when I saw the final horror. More footprints circling my truck. The wind howled louder, carrying whispers that weren't mine. I didn't look back. I didn't check the cab again. I just ran, jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and floored it. The tires spun for a second before the truck lurched forward, tearing down the road. I didn't stop, not until I hit the next town, where I parked under the bright lights of a gas station and tried to convince myself it didn't happen. But when I opened the door, the smell hit me again, and on the passenger seat, pressed into the fabric, was a single, wet handprint. I never drove that highway again. Never picked up another hitchhiker. But sometimes, on long, empty roads, when the snow starts falling heavy and the air grows too still, I check the rearview mirror, and sometimes I see something sitting in the back seat, waiting. Story number 2, the man in the rearview. The first time I saw him, I thought it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. Long-haul trucking in the dead of winter does that to you. Blizzards blurring the road, fatigue creeping in like a slow poison, and isolation turning the night into something unnatural. But this was different. This wasn't just a shadow or a fleeting trick of the light. I was somewhere along Route 89, cutting through the frozen mountains, when I caught the first glimpse of him. A man sitting in the back of my cab. It was just a flash in the rearview mirror, but it was enough to send a spike of cold panic down my spine. He was there, a dark figure, just barely visible in the dim interior. My first instinct was to slam the brakes, but instinct is a dangerous thing on an icy road. Instead, I gripped the wheel, my pulse hammering against my ribs, and stole another glance. Nothing. The back seat was empty. I swallowed hard and forced a shaky breath, telling myself I was overtired. That's what happens when you've been running on gas station coffee and 4 hours of sleep. I kept my eyes on the road and pressed on, watching the mile markers blur past, the snowfall getting heavier by the second. But then it happened again. This time, I saw his face, pale, gaunt, eyes sunken deep, staring right at me. No expression, no movement, just sitting there, like he'd been in my truck the entire time. I swear, I could see the slow rise and fall of his chest, the way the dim light caught the sharp angles of his face. My breath caught, and I spun around, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst. No one. The seat was empty. I clenched my teeth, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe this was some kind of waking nightmare from pushing my body too far. I needed to stop for the night. Get some real sleep. I pulled into a rest stop about 20 miles ahead. It was barely more than a patch of asphalt and a vending machine half buried in snow. The lot was empty, except for an old sedan covered in ice. The place was dead quiet. No other trucks, no movement. Just the sound of the wind howling through the trees. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the windshield. My own face looked wrong, pale, tired. I ran a hand over my face, trying to shake the unease gnawing at my gut. Then I looked in the rearview mirror again. He was still there, closer this time, not in the back seat, right behind me. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. His face was inches from mine, staring through the glass, his lips barely parted, like he was about to whisper something. I could see the ridges of his cheekbones, the way his breath didn't fog up the glass. My hand shot for the door handle. I scrambled out into the snow, nearly slipping as I backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I turned to look at my truck, half expecting to see him still sitting there, but the cab was empty. I stood there, snow soaking through my boots, my chest heaving as I tried to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. But I knew what I saw. I knew. I wasn't alone in that truck. I wasn't alone at all. Shoving the thought away, I climbed back inside, locking the doors, even though I knew it wouldn't help. I left the engine running, blasting the heater, trying to make the space feel less suffocating. Sleep was out of the question, so I settled for gripping my coffee thermos like a lifeline and staring at the windshield, refusing to look at the mirrors again. That's when I heard it, a soft creak, the sound of weight shifting in the back seat. My breath hitched. I stayed perfectly still, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, to get out, to not turn around. But I had to. Slowly, I reached for the mirror, my fingers ice cold. I tilted it just enough to see the reflection of the back seat. And there he was, smiling. I don't remember the moment I threw the truck into drive. My hands moved on their own. My foot slammed the gas, and the tires spun against the ice before catching. I tore out of that lot, the vending machine, and frozen trees, vanishing into the rear view along with the man. He was gone. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to blink, refusing to check the mirror again. I didn't stop. Not for fuel, not for food. I drove straight through the storm, my body running on adrenaline and raw fear. By the time I finally pulled into a well-lit truck stop, dawn was creeping over the horizon. My hands trembled as I shut off the engine. For the first time in hours, I dared to check the mirror. Nothing, just my own reflection, haggard and pale. I exhaled sharply, almost laughing at how ridiculous it all seemed in the light of day. Maybe it really had been exhaustion. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I stepped into the diner, the bell jingling as I entered. The place smelled like burnt coffee and fried eggs, and the warmth was a welcome relief from the bitter cold outside. I ordered a coffee and took a seat at the counter, my fingers still shaking as I gripped the cup. An older guy sitting next to me glanced over. "You look like you saw a ghost, son." I forced a chuckle. Something like that. His expression shifted, something dark flickering behind his eyes. "Route 89? The coffee in my hand went still. I turned to look at him fully. He was watching me carefully, like he already knew the answer. I nodded slowly. He let out a breath, shaking his head. Damn fool, truckers never learn. You ain't the first to see him? Won't be the last, neither. A chill ran through me, deeper than any winter cold. I swallowed hard. Who is he? The old man sipped his coffee, his gaze distant, like he was remembering something he didn't want to. No one knows for sure. Some say he was a driver just like you. Ran his truck off the road in a blizzard. Others say he was a hitchhiker, froze to death when no one stopped for him. But everybody agrees on one thing. I waited, heart pounding. What's that? He set his cup down, looking me dead in the eye. If you see him once, he's just watching, but if you see him twice, he's waiting for you. My blood ran cold. I pushed my coffee away, my appetite gone. I left cash on the counter and stood up, feeling every muscle in my body tense as I walked back to my truck. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and checked the rear view one last time. Empty. But as I turned the key in the ignition, I swore I felt something behind me. Something close. Something waiting. Story number 3. The last rest stop. By the time I realized I was lost, the storm had swallowed the road. The snow came down in thick sheets, blurring the highway into a featureless stretch of white. I'd been driving for nearly 10 hours straight, exhaustion settling deep into my bones, but I had no choice. The delivery was due by morning, and stopping wasn't an option, not until the road disappeared beneath my tires. I checked my GPS. Nothing. No service. Just a frozen, empty road stretching into the abyss. I had no memory of missing an exit, no reason to be on this unfamiliar stretch of highway. The snowstorm had turned everything unrecognizable. Then I saw it. A rest stop up ahead. The neon glow of a diner sign flickering through the storm. Relief flooded my chest. It wasn't on my route. Hell, I didn't remember ever seeing it before. But I wasn't about to argue. My hands were shaking. My eyelids heavy. I needed a break. I pulled into the lot, my tires crunching over fresh snow. The place was eerily quiet. A single row of trucks sat motionless, their windshields frosted over, their cabs empty. No movement inside the diner, no figures in the window. Just the buzzing neon light, sputtering like it was struggling to stay alive. Something about it felt wrong, but the fatigue weighed heavier than my unease. I stepped inside, the door jingling as I entered. The warmth hit me instantly. The diner smelled of stale coffee and something sweet, like old syrup left too long on the table. It looked like any other roadside diner. Booths lined up against the fogged-up windows, a long counter with red stools, a jukebox sitting silent in the corner. And yet, everything felt still. The waitress stood behind the counter, her back to me. Her uniform was faded, yellowed with age, but pressed neat. She wasn't moving, not even shifting her weight. Just standing there, staring at something in the distance. I cleared my throat. Hey, coffee? She turned, slow and deliberate, like she'd forgotten she wasn't alone. Her face was pale, almost too smooth, like it wasn't used to making expressions. But she smiled, and that was somehow worse. Of course, sweetheart, she said, voice too bright, too rehearsed. Take a seat anywhere. I slid into the nearest booth, ignoring the way my skin prickled. The place was warm, too warm. My fingers tingled, heat pressing into my chest. I pulled off my coat, glancing around at the empty diner. Storm's bad tonight, I said, more to fill the silence than anything. The waitress nodded, setting a coffee cup in front of me. Sure is. I looked at her. How long you guys been open? I don't remember ever seeing this place before. She tilted her head, that same stiff, unnatural smile on her lips. Oh, we're always here. A chill slid down my spine. I picked up the coffee. It smelled fine, but when I took a sip, it was ice cold. I set it down, my pulse picking up. That's when I noticed the clock above the counter. The hands weren't moving, just stuck at 3:17. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Something was very wrong. I reached for my phone. No service. The screen glitched for a second, static lines flickering across it before shutting off completely. The waitress was still watching me, her smile never faltering. I needed to leave. I stood up, reaching for my coat, but the door swung open before I could move. A man stepped inside, shaking snow from his shoulders. He wore a trucker's jacket, his face lined with deep wrinkles. His eyes flicked to me, then to the waitress, and I swear, in that moment, something passed between them. His jaw clenched. "You need to leave, right now." The waitress's smile didn't move, but something in her expression changed, like she wasn't used to being challenged. The man turned to me, eyes dark with urgency. "You hear me? Get back in your truck. Keep driving. Don't stop, no matter what you see." My breath stalled in my chest. What the hell is this place?" The waitress tilted her head again, her neck creaking like old wood. "Why don't you sit back down, dear?" I took a step back, my legs trembling. The man grabbed my arm. His hand was ice cold. "Go. Now." I didn't argue. My body moved on instinct, shoving past him toward the door. But just as I reached it, I glanced back. The man hadn't moved, but the waitress had. Her face had changed. Her eyes were gone, just dark, gaping holes. Her mouth stretched too wide, her skin splitting like old fabric. And as she opened it, I heard something. Not a voice, but a sound. A low, distorted hum, vibrating through my bones. I ran. I crashed into the truck, my hands fumbling with the keys. The diner lights flickered violently, shadows twisting inside. I didn't look back. I started the engine and floored it, my tires skidding over the ice. I hit the highway, the snowstorm closing in again. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart hammering against my ribs. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I drove, I don't know how long. Then, through the storm, I saw it, the diner, up ahead, exactly where I just left it. The same buzzing neon sign, the same empty lot, and standing outside, under the flickering glow, was the waitress, waiting, smiling. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I pressed the gas harder, the speedometer creeping past safety limits. The diner vanished behind me, swallowed by the snow. I drove until I saw another set of lights, real ones. A different truck stop, filled with people, warmth spilling through the window. I pulled in, my hands shaking as I parked. I sat there for a long time, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what just happened. I never found that road again, never saw that diner again. Sometimes, on long, dark highways, when the snow is falling thick and the world feels too empty, I see the glow of a neon sign in the distance, and I keep driving. Story number 4. Don't look at the deer. I first saw it just past mile marker 112. A deer, standing in the middle of the road, frozen in the high beams of my truck. Its body was covered in frost, steam rising from its back in the freezing air. Nothing unusual about that. Winters out here were brutal, and deer were a common sight. But something about it made my stomach twist. It wasn't moving, not even flinching, just standing there, its head slightly tilted, staring straight at me. I eased my foot onto the brake, trying not to skid on the ice. The snow had been falling for hours, covering everything in a thick, silent blanket. The storm had swallowed the road behind me, making it impossible to turn back. I was already running late, and stopping wasn't an option. I honked my horn. The deer didn't react. That's when I noticed its eyes. They weren't reflecting the headlights like they should have. No glassy shimmer, no quick flash of white. Just black, hollow, endless, black. A wave of nausea crawled up my throat. Something was wrong. Then, through the static of my CB radio, a voice crackled in, weak, distant. Don't look at it. I flinched, my heart slamming against my ribs. The voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. Keep driving, it said, the signal warping, distorting. Don't stop. Don't look at it. A cold sweat broke across my back. I searched the road ahead, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. But the deer still hadn't moved. Then its head snapped to the side. Fast, too fast, like a glitch in a video. My stomach flipped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The voice on the radio crackled again, more urgent this time. Drive. I slammed the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires skidding against the ice. For a moment, I thought I wouldn't make it, that the road would swallow me, that the thing would move, do something. But it didn't. It just stood there, watching. I gritted my teeth, forcing my gaze forward, refusing to look in the mirrors. My hands were trembling, my pulse hammering in my ears. The moment I passed the deer, a cold wave washed over me, like stepping through an invisible wall of ice. And then I heard it, a crunch, a dragging sound. Something was following me. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless, but I could hear it. The slow, deliberate scrape of hooves against the asphalt. Not running, not galloping, walking, matching my speed. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my eyes on the road. I wanted to check my mirrors to see if it was still there, but the voice from the radio repeated in my head. Don't look at it. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The sound never faded. Then my radio crackled again. You're almost there, the voice said. Stay on the road. Don't stop, no matter what you hear. I pressed harder on the gas, the truck roaring through the storm. The snow was thick now, swirling like a living thing, but I didn't dare slow down. The sound of hooves grew louder, closer. Then, something tapped against my window. A sharp, deliberate knock. My vision blurred. My fingers ached against the wheel. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn my head, to look. Another knock. This time, from the passenger side. I clenched my jaw so hard, my teeth hurt. The air inside the cab was freezing, my breath coming out in thick, ragged clouds. Then, from just outside the truck, a whisper. Let me in. It wasn't the voice from the radio. It was closer. A low, slow murmur, like a breath against the glass. I could hear the weight behind the words, the shape of something just outside my vision. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. The whisper came again. You saw me. I bit down on my tongue hard enough to taste blood. The voice chuckled, a wet, rattling sound. You looked. Number I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But the doubt crept in, wrapping around my throat like a hand. The knocking turned into a scraping, nails dragging along the metal of my door. Slow, deliberate. Let me in, the voice whispered again, almost pleading now. It's cold. I pressed the pedal to the floor. The truck surged forward, speedometer climbing past safe limits. But I didn't care. The road was a blur. The snow, a dizzying wall of white. But I refused to stop. Then, suddenly, silence. The knocking stopped. The scraping stopped. Even the sound of hooves was gone. I forced myself to breathe. My pulse pounded against my skull. my hands still locked in a death grip on the wheel. The road ahead was clearing, the snow thinning. Then my radio crackled one last time. "You made it." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My limbs felt weak, my vision hazy, but I kept going. I didn't stop until I reached the next truck stop, the bright lights spilling onto the pavement like a lifeline. I parked, my body aching from the tension, my mind still spinning. The world outside felt real again, normal. But when I stepped out of the truck, my stomach dropped. There, in the snow, beside my driver side door, a set of hoof prints leading toward the truck, not away. Story number 5, cabin at the end of the road. The snowstorm hit harder than I expected. 1 minute, the road ahead was clear. The next, it had vanished under a thick white curtain. I had been driving for nearly 12 hours straight, my body running on nothing but gas station coffee and adrenaline. The delivery wasn't due until morning, but the storm had swallowed any chance of making it on time. I could barely see the highway signs, let alone the road. My GPS had stopped working hours ago, flickering between dead zones, and now I was navigating blind. The wind howled around the truck, rocking it on its wheels as I pushed forward, scanning the roadside for anything, a rest stop, a gas station, anything that could get me off the highway before the ice took control. That's when I saw the turnoff, a narrow road, barely visible under the snow, winding off into the trees. A sign stood at its entrance, leaning at an odd angle, but the snow had caked over the words. It didn't matter. I had no other choice. My tires struggled for grip as I made the turn, following the path into the dense forest. The trees loomed on either side, their branches heavy with snow. The headlights casting twisted shadows across the drifts. I drove for what felt like miles before I saw it. A cabin. It sat at the end of the road, old and weathered, but the windows were glowing with a warm, flickering light. Smoke curled from the chimney, twisting up into the stormy sky. Relief flooded through me. Someone was home. I could wait out the storm, maybe even grab a hot meal before heading back out. I pulled up beside the cabin, the truck's tires crunching over ice. The place was eerily silent, the wind dying down as if the forest itself had muffled the sound. I grabbed my jacket, stepping out into the knee-deep snow, my breath curling in the frozen air. As I approached the porch, I noticed something odd. The snow was undisturbed, no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to suggest that anyone had come in or out of the cabin recently, but the fire was lit. Someone had to be inside. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. The door creaked open under the pressure, swinging inward to reveal the dimly lit interior. The warmth hit me instantly, thick and heavy, the smell of burning wood filling the air. The fireplace crackled in the corner, its flames casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. But the cabin was empty. I hesitated at the doorway, every instinct telling me to turn back. But the cold outside was relentless. The storm had worsened, the wind howling again, rattling the trees. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, the sound of the latch clicking into place, echoing through the room. It was a simple setup. Wooden chairs, a small table, a single rocking chair near the fire. A kettle sat on the stove, steam curling from its spout. Someone had been here. Maybe they were outside, checking on something. I called out, "Hello? Anyone home?" Silence. I glanced around, unease settling deep in my gut. The place felt wrong. Not abandoned, but untouched, like a set in a play that no one had stepped onto yet. The walls were covered in carvings, small, intricate symbols etched into the wood. They twisted and curled, some forming patterns, others looking like warnings. I took a step closer to the fireplace, and that's when I saw it. A book. It was sitting open on the table, its pages filled with my name. I felt my pulse hammer against my ribs, over and over in shaky, uneven handwriting. My full name. My hands went ice cold. The storm raged outside, rattle in the walls, but inside, the air felt heavy, thick, like it was pressing against my skin. And then, from somewhere inside the cabin, I heard it. A creak, slow, deliberate, like a footstep on old wooden floorboards. I turned sharply, my breath caught in my throat. There was no one there, just shadows stretching long against the walls. The fire crackled behind me, but suddenly, it wasn't warm anymore. Another creak. This time, closer. My legs locked in place. My breathing was too loud, too uneven. I didn't want to move, didn't want to look. Then, from the darkened hallway leading deeper into the cabin, a whisper. It wasn't words. It wasn't even a voice. Just a sound, low and hollow, like something imitating human speech without understanding it. I turned and bolted. I ran for the door. My boots slipping against the wooden floor as I yanked it open. The cold slammed into me, stinging my skin, but I didn't care. I sprinted for the truck, my breath ragged, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the keys. I climbed into the cab and locked the doors, my heart pounding against my ribs. The headlights cast long shadows over the snow, illuminating the cabin's darkened windows. And then, as I stared, I saw it. In the window, just beyond the glass, a figure, not a person, not human. It was tall, its body stretched unnaturally thin, its limbs too long, its face, wrong, too smooth, too featureless, except for the mouth. The mouth was wide, too wide, stretching across its face in a jagged, gaping grin. I didn't wait. I slammed the truck into reverse, the tires skidding over ice, the engine roaring as I tore away from the cabin. The road blurred past me, the storm swallowing everything in its path. But I didn't slow down. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main highway. I never found that road again. When I checked my GPS later, there was no record of it. No side road, no turnoff, no signs of a cabin anywhere in that area. It was like it had never existed, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, on long, empty highways, when the snow is thick and the world feels too quiet, I see something in my rearview mirror. A dark figure, standing just at the edge of the road, waiting. Story number 6. The radio knows your name. The first time the radio said my name, I nearly drove off the road. I had been on the highway for hours, the snowstorm making everything feel endless. The road stretched ahead, buried under thick layers of ice. The trees lined the side, barely visible through the heavy snowfall. It was just me, my truck, and the sound of static humming through the CB radio. I had the channel open, hoping for some company, maybe another trucker stuck in the storm. But the radio had been dead for hours. No chatter, no signals, just the occasional burst of white noise breaking through the silence until I heard it. A voice, weak and crackling. David. My stomach clenched. I hadn't touched the mic. I hadn't spoken. But my name had just come through the speakers. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the wheel. Maybe it was another trucker, someone who knew me. But the way the voice said it, slow, deliberate, like testing how the name felt. I reached for the radio, my hand trembling slightly. Who's this? Silence. Then the static shifted again. A whisper. "You don't remember me?" A chill crawled up my spine. The voice was strange. Not quite male, not quite female. Distorted, like a recording played too many times. I forced a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "This some kind of joke?" I asked. "If you know me, say your name." Silence again. But the air in the cab felt heavier now, thicker, like something unseen had settled in the seat beside me. Then the voice returned. "You left me behind." I nearly slammed the brakes. My pulse pounded against my skull. I glanced at the passenger seat, at the empty space that suddenly felt anything but empty. My mouth was dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." The radio hissed. The static twisted into something garbled, something almost like laughter. "You do." The snowstorm had thickened. I could barely see 10 feet ahead, the world outside nothing but white and shadows. My headlights carved a path through the dark, but it didn't feel like I was going anywhere. I turned the radio off. The silence inside the truck was suffocating. My breath felt too loud, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I needed to stop, clear my head. An old song, a song I hadn't heard in years, a song that should not have been playing. Icy fear locked my chest. I knew this song, knew it too well. It was the song that had been playing the night my brother died. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. "Who the hell is this?" The voice hummed along with the tune, slow and broken. "You left me behind." I slammed the radio off again, harder this time. My breathing was uneven, my mind racing. I was losing it. This was all in my head. It had to be. Then, the headlights flickered. For a brief second, the road disappeared. Not in the snow, not in the dark. It was just gone. And in its place, through the brief blackness, I saw something. A face. Pale. Sunken. Lips curled into something between a smile and a scream. And I knew that face. The truck jolted as my tires hit an unseen patch of ice. I fought for control, my breath ragged, my hands slick with sweat despite the cold. The radio crackled back on, the voice whispering through the speakers, softer now. We were supposed to go together. My blood turned to ice. I remembered the accident, the night I lost my brother. We had been on this very road, a different truck, a different time, but the same snow, the same cold swallowing everything. We had been arguing the way brothers do. He had asked me to stop, told me we should wait out the storm, but I didn't listen. I kept driving. And then the black ice took us. The truck had skidded, flipped. I survived. He didn't. I never went back. Never looked. I left everything there that night. The wreck, the road, the past. But it hadn't left me. My breath shuddered in my throat. My hands ached from how tightly I was gripping the wheel. The snow outside was falling slower now, like time itself was stretching thin. And then up ahead through the dim glow of my headlights, I saw him, standing in the middle of the road, waiting. I jerked the wheel, skidding wildly, the truck groaning as I barely avoided him. My body slammed against the seatbelt, pain lancing through my ribs. I came to a stop, the truck rocking slightly, my breath shallow. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see if he was still there, but I did. And he was, standing right outside my window, close enough to touch. His face was the same as I remembered, except for his eyes. They were black, endless, hollow. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then he smiled, and through the radio, his voice, clear this time, no static, no distortion. "You can't leave me behind again." The truck went dead. Engine, lights, everything. The last thing I heard before the world went black was his laughter. and the sound of the passenger door unlocking. I woke up at a rest stop. Dawn had broken. The storm had passed. My truck sat idling, the radio silent, everything normal except for the passenger seatbelt. It was buckled, and in the empty seat, a faint indentation, like someone had been sitting there all night. I never drove that road again. But sometimes late at night, and when I turn on the radio, I hear static, and underneath it, a voice, humming, waiting. Story number 7, Frozen Passengers. I first saw them just past mile marker 186, a group of people standing by the roadside in the middle of a blizzard. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The storm had been raging for hours. The road barely visible under the thick curtain of falling snow. No one had any business being out here. Not in this weather. Not on this stretch of highway. And yet, there they were. They stood perfectly still, facing the road. A line of figures draped in old, tattered clothing, their faces barely visible in the swirling snow. No movement, no signs of distress, just standing, their bodies rigid, their heads tilted slightly, as if listening. I gripped the wheel tighter. My headlights swept over them as I approached, and for a split second, I caught a clearer glimpse. Their skin was pale, too pale. Their eyes were black, hollow pits staring straight ahead. I hit the gas. The truck roared past them, the wind howling as I fought against the storm. My heart pounded against my ribs, my breath shallow. I told myself I was just tired, that the snow had warped my vision, that I hadn't seen what I thought I had. But then, my CB radio crackled to life. A voice, weak, distant. You shouldn't have looked. I nearly jumped out of my seat. My hands tightened on the wheel, my pulse hammering. The highway had been dead silent for hours. No truckers, no signals, nothing but static. I grabbed the mic, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Who's this?" Silence. Then, through the static, a low whisper. "They're still watching." A wave of nausea crawled up my throat. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my breath hitching. The road behind me was empty. Nothing but swirling snow and darkness. But somehow, I knew they were there. I slammed the radio off. I focused on the road, pushing forward, refusing to let my mind slip into fear. Just needed to make it to the next truck stop. Needed to get off this road. Then, the temperature inside the cab dropped. The heater was on full blast, but suddenly the air was freezing, my breath fogging up in front of me. My fingers went numb against the wheel, and that's when I heard it, a soft rustling behind me. The sound of fabric shifting, like someone moving in the back of the cab. My whole body went rigid. The truck had been empty. I hadn't picked anyone up. I forced myself to look in the mirror. My stomach dropped. They were inside the truck. The same figures from the roadside. Sitting in the back, their hollow eyes locked on me. Their frozen skin cracked like old porcelain. Their lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. I couldn't breathe. The truck swerved slightly as I jerked the wheel, my heart slamming against my ribs. I blinked, desperate for reality to make sense again, but they didn't disappear. They just sat there, watching. A whisper slid through the freezing air. "You saw us. Now we're here." I clenched my teeth, forcing my eyes back to the road. My mind was spiraling, panic clawing at the edges of my sanity. I needed to focus, needed to keep driving. The truck stop wasn't far. Just few more miles. But the whispers grew louder, software slow, surrounding me. The figures in the back seat weren't sitting anymore. They were closer. I could feel the weight of their presence, the way the air seemed to ripple around them. The windshield fogged up from the sudden drop in temperature, the frost creeping along the glass. Then, the whisper changed. It wasn't random anymore. It was my name, over and over. David. I gritted my teeth, my hands aching from the death grip I had on the wheel. I wasn't going to stop, wasn't going to acknowledge them. Then something touched my shoulder, cold, brittle, like frozen fingers pressing into my jacket. I lost it. I floored the gas, the truck roaring as I tore through the storm, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears. The road blurred past, my vision narrowing, but I did not stop. And then the truck stop appeared, bright lights cutting that through the storm, a beacon of safety. The moment I hit the lot, the air shifted, the whispers stopped, the freezing presence lifted. I slammed the brakes, the truck skidding slightly before coming to a jerking stop. My breath came in ragged gasps, my entire body trembling. I didn't dare look in the back seat. I threw the door open and stumbled into the cold night, the normal kind of cold, the kind that didn't feel alive. Other truckers were around, some fueling up, some sitting in their cabs. Real people, real noise. The world felt solid again. I leaned against the truck, my breath shaking. Then finally, I forced myself to look through the window. The cab was empty. No Frost, no figures, just an empty truck. For a moment, I almost believed I had imagined it, until I saw the seats, wet, soaked with melted snow, like something had been there. And then my radio crackled one last time, a single whisper. See you on the next road. Story number 8, Whispers in the Fog. The fog was thick enough to choke on. It had rolled in fast, swallowing the road, turning the world into a shapeless gray void. I had been driving for hours, cutting through the frozen highway, when it happened. 1 minute, the road was clear, just an endless stretch of black asphalt, winding through the snow-covered trees. The next, the fog slammed into me like a solid wall. It wasn't normal fog. It moved strangely, twisting in slow, deliberate currents, as if something inside it was breathing. My headlights barely cut through it, the beams swallowed before they could stretch more than a few feet ahead. The road disappeared beneath my tires. Then my radio crackled. At first, I thought it was just static. The storm had been messing with my signal all night. But as I reached to turn the dial, I heard it. A whisper. My hand froze above the knob. It was faint, like a voice carried through water. Too soft to understand, but there, speaking. I let out a slow breath, glancing at the empty passenger seat. The heater was blasting, but suddenly the air inside the cab felt colder. The whisper came again, louder. I swallowed, hard. Breaker. Anyone on this channel? My voice sounded too thin, too weak. Silence. Then, through the static, a woman's voice. Help me. My grip tightened on the wheel. The words were warped, stretching and twisting as if they were being pulled apart before reaching me. I tried to shake it off. Truckers heard weird things on the radio all the time. Old signals bouncing around the atmosphere, picking up ghost broadcasts from decades ago. But this didn't feel like a stray signal. It felt close. I cleared my throat. Miss, are you out in this storm? No response, just more static, shifting, breaking apart, reforming. Then, I see your lights. A sharp chill ran through me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but all I could see was fog. Thick, unbroken, pressing against the glass like a living thing. I shouldn't have answered. I knew that now. The whisper came again, closer this time. Pull over! The air in the truck turned freezing. My breath came out in white clouds, even though the heater was still on full blast. Pull over, she whispered again. I shook my head, forcing my eyes on the road. I can't do that. The fog twisted outside, curling like fingers against the windshield. My skin prickled. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to keep driving. Then, through the thick fog ahead, I saw it. A figure, standing in the middle of the road. A woman. Her dress billowed in the wind, but she didn't move, didn't flinch. Just stood there, arms at her sides, head tilted slightly. My heart slammed against my ribs. I hit the brakes, tires skidding over the ice, the truck groaning as I fought for control. My breath came in quick, panicked bursts, and then she was gone. Just gone. The fog parted slightly where she had been, revealing nothing but empty road. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. The radio crackled again. That was close. I jerked, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers ached. The voice was inside the truck, right next to me. I didn't turn my head, didn't move. The whisper slithered through the freezing air, curling into my ear. Let me in. I floored the gas. The truck roared forward, the tires slipping before catching on the frozen road. The fog swallowed everything, pressing against the windshield, twisting in unnatural shapes. My breath hitched as I stole a glance in the mirror. She was sitting in the back seat. Not a reflection, not a trick of the light. She was there. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken black pits. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, her voice crawling into my bones. You shouldn't have stopped. I yanked my gaze away, forcing my eyes back to the road. My pulse was a frantic, uneven beat. Keep driving, I told myself. Don't stop. Don't look. But the whisper didn't stop. It filled the cab, a chorus of voices now, overlapping, shifting, repeating the same words. Let me in. I gritted my teeth, sweat slicking my palms despite the cold. The road was endless. The fog refused to break. My headlights barely reached beyond the hood. Then, up ahead, lights. A truck stop. I nearly sobbed in relief. I pushed the gas harder, speeding toward the glow of neon signs breaking through the storm. The moment I hit the lot, the fog vanished. I slammed the brakes, my body trembling as the truck skidded to a stop. The world outside was clear again, just snow, just frozen asphalt, just the quiet hum of diesel engines from other trucks parked nearby. I let out a shuddering breath. Then, slowly, I turned to check the back seat. It was empty, but on the fogged-up window, traced in the condensation, was a single word. Soon. Story number 9. The truck that shouldn't exist. I first noticed it just past midnight, somewhere along Route 46. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, thick and relentless, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The road ahead was just a narrow strip of asphalt, swallowed by an endless white void. I had been driving for 10 hours straight, exhaustion creeping into my bones, my eyelids heavy despite the bitter cold. But then, in the distance, I saw it. Headlights, bright, unmoving. A truck parked on the shoulder, its cab angled slightly toward the road, like it had pulled over in a hurry. I slowed as I approached, expecting to see hazard lights flashing, maybe a driver waving for help. But there was nothing. No movement. No sign of life. The truck was identical to mine. Same make, same model. Same company logo on the trailer. A chill slid down my spine. The odds of that were slim. Trucking companies ran fleets, sure, but I'd never seen this exact truck before. As I passed, I risked a glance into the cab and nearly slammed on the brakes. Someone was sitting inside, but they weren't moving. They were slumped forward, their face hidden by the brim of their hat. I only saw them for a second, but in that brief moment, I could feel something was wrong. The air inside my own truck seemed to drop in temperature. The heater was blasting. But suddenly, my breath was fogging up the windshield. The radio crackled. Not static, not chatter, just a low, distorted hum, like something trying to form words. My fingers tightened around the wheel. I swallowed hard, shaking off the unease. Probably just another trucker caught in the storm. Maybe asleep, maybe dead tired like I was. I kept driving. 10 miles later, I saw it again. Same truck, same position, same slumped figure in the driver's seat. My stomach twisted. That was impossible. There had been no turns, no exits, just a straight stretch of highway, buried in snow. I checked my mirrors, half expecting to see the first truck still sitting behind me. Her dress billowed in the wind, but she didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, arms at her sides, head tilted slightly. My heart slammed against my ribs. I hit the brakes, tires skidding over the ice, the truck groaning as I fought for control. My breath came in quick, panicked bursts, and then she was gone, just gone. The fog parted slightly where she had been, revealing nothing but empty road. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. The radio crackled again. That was close. I jerked, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers ached. The voice was inside the truck, right next to me. I didn't turn my head, didn't move. The whisper slithered through the freezing air, curling into my ear. Let me in. I floored the gas. The truck roared forward, the tires slipping before catching on the frozen road. The fog swallowed everything, pressing against the windshield, twisting in unnatural shapes. My breath hitched as I stole a glance in the mirror. She was sitting in the back seat. Not a reflection, not a trick of the light. She was there. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken black pits. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, her voice crawling into my bones. You shouldn't have stopped. I yanked my gaze away, forcing my eyes back to the road. My pulse was a frantic, uneven beat. Keep driving, I told myself. Don't stop. Don't look. But the whisper didn't stop. It filled the cab, a chorus of voices now, overlapping, shifting, repeating the same words. Let me in. I gritted my teeth, sweat slicking my palms despite the cold. The road was endless. The fog refused to break. My headlights barely reached beyond the hood. Then, up ahead, lights. A truck stop. I nearly sobbed in relief. I pushed the gas harder, speeding toward the glow of neon signs breaking through the storm. The moment I hit the lot, the fog vanished. I slammed the brakes, my body trembling as the truck skidded to a stop. The world outside was clear again, just snow, just frozen asphalt, just the quiet hum of diesel engines from other trucks parked nearby. I let out a shuddering breath. Then, slowly, I turned to check the back seat. It was empty, but on the fogged-up window, traced in the condensation, was a single word. Soon. Story number 10. The eyes in the snow. The first time I saw the eyes, I thought it was just the storm playing tricks on me. I had been driving for nearly 13 hours, pushing through the endless stretch of frozen highway. The blizzard had swallowed the road completely, leaving only a narrow path carved by my headlights. The snow came down so heavy, it blurred the edges of the world, turning everything into a suffocating white void. I was exhausted, my hands stiff from gripping the wheel, but I couldn't stop. Not out here. Then, through the swirling snow, something flickered at the edge of my vision. Eyes. Bright, gleaming orbs staring at me from the tree line. I barely caught them before they vanished, swallowed by the storm. But for the brief second I saw them, my chest tightened. They weren't animal eyes. They were too high, too still. And worst of all, they weren't reflecting light. They were glowing on their own. A shiver crawled down my spine. I kept driving. I told myself I was just tired, that my mind was fraying at the edges after too many hours on the road. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true, because the further I drove, the more I saw them. First in the trees, flickering between the branches like fireflies, then closer, near the guardrails, watching, never blinking, never moving, just there. By the time I reached the next truck stop, my nerves were shot. The place was nearly deserted, just a few rigs parked under the dim glow of the overhead lights. I pulled into a space near the diner and shut off the engine, my breath coming in shaky bursts. The heater hummed softly, filling the cab with warmth, but I still felt frozen to my core. I rubbed my eyes, forcing a slow breath. Get a grip, man. Then, a tap at the window. I jolted so hard I nearly hit my head on the steering wheel. My heart pounded against my ribs as I turned, expecting to see some late-night worker, maybe another trucker needing help. But there was no one there. Just snow. Empty, untouched snow. I swallowed hard. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale and wide-eyed. The truck stop felt too quiet, too hollow. Even the few rigs parked nearby seemed wrong, like they had been sitting there for years. Then, in the corner of the windshield, the eyes. Closer now. Not in the trees, not near the road, right outside. I couldn't breathe. My fingers dug into the seat, my body refusing to move. The eyes didn't glow like an animal's, didn't reflect the truck stop's dim light. They were empty, black void staring at me from inches away. And then, slowly, they blinked. A choke sound crawled up my throat. The knock came again, software rhythmic, as if whatever was out there knew I had seen it. I reached for the door locks, my hands trembling. Another knock, and then, through the frozen silence, a voice let me in. The words slid through the air, too smooth, too calm. I couldn't answer, couldn't move. The snow outside was falling slower now, almost suspended. The world seemed frozen in place, the truck stop lights dimming slightly, as if something was pressing against reality itself. Another knock. Then the handle jiggled. A raw bolt of panic shot through me. I turned the key, firing up the engine, my pulse hammering as the dashboard lights flickered back to life. My hands were slick with sweat. The cab suddenly suffocatingly hot. I didn't look at the window again. I would not look. I slammed the truck into gear and peeled out of the lot, my tires skidding over the ice before catching traction. The headlights carved through the darkness, the diner and the gas pumps vanishing in my mirrors. But as I sped onto the highway, something moved in the rear view. A shadow, sitting in the back seat. I couldn't see its face, just a dark shape, shifting slightly as if settling in. My throat tightened. My whole body went cold. Then the radio crackled. "Why did you leave?" The voice was wrong, too familiar. I knew it. I knew it like I knew my own, because it was mine. I slammed the radio off, pressing my foot harder on the gas. My knuckles were white against the wheel, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The road ahead stretched into the abyss, endless and dark. But in the mirror, the shadow didn't disappear. It only smiled. I drove for hours without stopping. When I finally dared to look again, the back seat was empty, but in the frost creeping along the inside of the windshield, something had been traced by a finger, 2 circles, eyes, watching. Story number 11. They buried me here. I don't remember taking this road. The map said it was a shortcut. Just a quiet back road, cutting through the snow-covered forest, a way to shave an hour off my route. But the deeper I drove, the more it felt like I had made a mistake. The road was too narrow, barely more than a strip of asphalt swallowed by endless trees. The snow fell heavier now, thick and suffocating, turning the world into a ghostly blur. The headlights barely cut through it, revealing only the twisting path ahead. Then my radio crackled. The CB had been dead all night, no signals, no voices, just static, until now. At first it was faint, like a voice drifting through water, then clearer, a whisper sliding through the speakers. They buried me here. A chill crawled up my spine. I swallowed hard, forcing a breath. Just an old transmission, bouncing off the storm. That happened sometimes. I reached for the dial to switch channels. They buried me here. The voice repeated, clearer this time. My hands froze above the dial. The voice was low, hollow, but something about it felt wrong. It wasn't asking for help. It wasn't pleading. It was stating a fact. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. Probably just interference, I muttered. Then, through the thick snowfall, I saw it, a figure, standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, the truck groaning as it skidded slightly over the ice. My breath came in quick, sharp bursts, my pulse hammering in my ears. The figure didn't move. At first, I thought it was a person, a man, wrapped in an old tattered coat, his face obscured by the heavy snowfall. But then my headlights caught something. His feet weren't touching the ground. The air inside the cab turned freezing. My breath curled in thick white clouds, my skin prickling with a deep, unnatural cold. The figure lifted its head, and I saw its eyes, not human, not animal, just empty, hollow voids stretching too deep into its skull. The moment they locked onto mine, something shifted. The snow around me stopped falling. The engine hummed softly, but the sound felt far away. The world had gone silent. No wind, no creaking trees, nothing. Then the figure smiled, not with its mouth, with its eyes. I slammed the truck into reverse. The tires spun against the ice before catching, the whole rig shuddering as I backed away. The figure didn't move. It just watched. I needed to get out of here, find an exit, a town, something. I threw the truck into drive and peeled away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The road stretched ahead, disappearing into the storm. I gripped the wheel tighter, refusing to look in the mirrors. Then the voice returned, closer now. They buried me here. I nearly swerved off the road. The voice wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was inside the cab. My hands shook. I didn't want to look. Didn't want to see what was sitting in the passenger seat. But my body moved before I could stop it. And he was there. The same figure. Closer now. His face too clear. Too real. Skin pale. Stretched thin like something half decayed but refusing to die. His hollow eyes locked onto mine, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. You shouldn't have come this way, he whispered. I nearly lost control. My heart slammed against my ribs, my fingers trembling as I gripped the wheel for dear life. Get out, I choked, my voice breaking. The thing tilted its head. I can't. The world outside blurred past, trees twisting in the storm, the headlights struggling to pierce the darkness. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I needed to wake up, needed this to not be real. Then I saw the road sign, ahead, half buried in snow. Welcome to Black Hollow. I slammed the brakes. The truck screeched to a stop, the tires groaning against the frozen road. My breath came in heavy, uneven gasps as I stared at the sign, my vision tunneling. Black Hollow didn't exist. Not anymore. It was a town that had been abandoned 30 years ago because everyone in it had died. I turned sharply to look at the passenger seat, but the figure was gone. Air inside the cab was suffocatingly still. I had to get out of here. I threw the truck back into gear and tore down the road, the snow swallowing my taillights. The town was gone now, the sign disappearing behind me like it had never been there. My pulse was a frantic drumbeat in my ears, my mind racing. Then, the headlights flickered. For a split second, the road vanished, and in its place, I saw something. A graveyard. The snow-covered ground was uneven, broken in places, like something had crawled out, and scattered among the graves were figures, standing, watching, waiting. Then, as fast as it had appeared, it was gone. The road snapped back into place, the storm raging around me. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew I hadn't escaped. The radio crackled. A whisper slid through the speakers, crawling under my skin, curling around my throat like cold fingers. They buried me here. I kept driving. I never stopped, but sometimes, in the dead of night, when the snow is falling thick and the road is empty, I hear it again. That voice, that whisper, and in my mirror, the hollow eyes, watching. If you made it this far, you're brave. Or maybe just as haunted as the roads we've traveled tonight. If you enjoyed these terrifying trucker tales, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more chilling stories. And if you've ever had a horror experience of your own, something eerie, something unexplained, share it in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story, if you dare. And before you go, check out the videos appearing on your screen for more nightmarish tales that will keep you awake long after the road ends. Stay safe out there. You never know who or what might be watching.